So today we're going to talk about the blues and piano blues. And I remember all those great boogie and blues players back in the day. And you might have heard some of those recordings and think, well, how can I possibly do that? But I'm going to break it down. I'm going to show you the chords you need. I'm going to show you different patterns that you can play in the left hand, and then I'm going to show you how to put a right hand with it and get some of those bluesy licks. We'll talk about scales in a little bit, but we're going to start with building blocks. Simple. So first of all, what chords do we need for the 12-bar blues? Well, if we're thinking them in as numbers, the chords, we need chord 1 for 4 bars, chord 4 for 2 bars, chord 1 for another 2 bars, chord 5 for 2 bars, and chord 1 for the last 2 bars. That makes the 12. Now, some of you who played a little bit of blues might say, oh, well, there's some other chords. Yes, I'm going to get to that. But let's get to grips with those chords first, and then we can think about adding other chords. So the notes we will need if, for example, we're in the key of C, chord 1 would be this chord, C, E, G. Chord 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 would be this one, which is F, A, C. And of course 5 would be G, B, D. So there's the 3 chords that we need to do a basic blues. Now, if you look at some of the videos of those old blues players, some of those New Orleans players, they were playing in the days before there were backing tracks, before there were drum machines, and they were creating all the rhythm and all the harmony just with the 2 hands. And that's why the left hand is so important, because it keeps you in place, it helps you, and it helps the listener to feel the beat, so that when you start doing things with the right hand, you've got that tempo going in the left hand. So how are we going to start? Well, if you listen to some old, I know we're talking about blues, but if you listen to some old rock and roll and rockabilly records, and there might be a double bass player playing, and quite often all he does is play the notes of the chords, what we call a broken chord, which is you've got the notes of the chords, but you're going to play them after each other. So let's just try that. This is what a boogie player might start doing. And I've told you the sequence of chords. This is how it would sound. Third bar, fourth bar, up to the F, just for 2 bars, back to the C for 2 bars, then to the G, 2 bars, and back to the C. So that gives us a basic left hand, and a lot of those old blues had a kind of swing to it. So let's see how we can vary that left hand just to give it a little bit more of the swing. So what I'm going to do now, to that triad, that C chord, I'm going to add the 6th note. Yeah, the A. With the F, it would be D. With the G, it would be. So instead of going just round on the chord, for the 4th beat, I'm going to go on to the 6th note. And then, of course, we will go on to the F. Now, to get that swing sound, and some people say, like a drummer would play 10 to 10, 10 to 10. We want to try and help people to hear that in the left hand. So what I'm going to do now, when I get to that A, I'm just going to play 2 swinging 8th notes. I'm going to go back to the G, so I'm going to do this. Get it? Now you can hear the swing. Back to the C. You might have noticed sometimes you'll end up with a repeated note, so it sounds a bit manufactured. Instead, I'm going to do a passing note. I'm going to do. Sounds nice, doesn't it? We're still concentrating on the left hand, and if you want to have the real 10 to 10, 10 to 10, we need to put another eighth note in just after the second beat. So you could do something like this. So basically I'm going up to the third, but before I go to the fifth, I'm just going to go back to the C again, and it gives it a nice little lilt, a nice little swing. It pushes on the rhythm. Up to the F. So there you go, we've got a nice thing doing. An alternative to that, but it depends how much stretch you've got in your hand, and this is quite a famous one you'll hear a lot of boogie players doing, where instead of going like we just did then, we're going to go up to the C. So we're going to go. That's a really, really nice sound, isn't it? The other thing is, if you imagine a drummer was playing the offbeat, 1, 2, 3, 4. We haven't got a drummer, so instead, your left hand is suggesting that drummer being there. Yeah. One more thing I'm going to show you before we start adding the right hand, and you'll be thinking, I'm sure, oh my word, there's so many different ways of playing that. How am I ever going to start with the right hand? Well, we'll go back to the basics again before we put the right hand in. But I just wanted to show you this. We did this. Now you can do something which we call implying notes. So let's imagine that C is there, but we're not actually going to play it. We're going to make a little rest, and we're just going to count it in our heads. So instead of playing, it's going to sound like this. I was doing a little sniff just to help you. You don't have to do that if you don't want. But if it helps you keep in time, that's fine. So. I don't need to play the whole sequence, but you get the idea. There's absolutely loads of ways to create a left hand and keep the rhythm going, and at the same time, although it's a broken chord, people can hear the harmony. They can hear which chord you're playing. Now, what about the right hand? Oh my, what we're going to do with the right hand? Well, of course, if you were singing or you were accompanying a singer, maybe all you'd want to do would be play the chords in the right hand. I think it's nice to add the seventh, and this is what we call the dominant seventh. Let me just explain. If we're in C major and we go to the dominant chord, which is the fifth chord, that's G. And if we add, there's the 1, 3, 5. If we add the 7th, we get something called the dominant 7th chord. Now, let's look how many notes there are between that D and that F. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. If we go back to our C chords and we do, that doesn't sound like a dominant 7th. The reason being is we've got too many intervals here. We want it to be, there we go. So we end it with a B flat. So there's the G1, there's the C1. So we have to remember to put a B flat there. And the same with the F. That's actually what we call a major 7, by the way. We need to play, okay, so here's the chords we got. Yeah. Now, let's go back to our first bass lines and we're going to play the chord on the top. So, doing it 4 times, yeah? Back to the C. Going to a G. Yeah, so now we can really hear the chords, and it's a bit fuller. We've got a bass line, but we've got some nice chords there. But we need to think how we're going to, what we call, voice the chords. So the best way to do this is to look at a chord like C7. So we've got C, E, G, B flat. We know the next chord we're going to go to is F7. But I wonder if there's a smoother way to do it. So we look at the chord and we think, what notes have we got? We've got C, E, G, B flat. And in the F, we've got F, A, C, E flat. Well, one of those notes is in both chords. Even though it's up here, we've got the C in both chords. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the C7, but when we go to the F7, we're going to leave that C there, and the other notes we need are F, A, we've got the C, E flat. So now we end up with this movement. Now, in the same way, when we go to the G, we've got a common note, which is the G. So let's see if we leave that there, and we can move the top note to the B. There's the D. So there's our chord, okay? That's what we would call a second inversion, by the way, because root, position, first inversion. I hope I'm not losing you, but if you watch this video again, I'm sure you'll get used to what is going on there. So we're going to play the C7 like that, the F7 like that, the G7 like that. Now let's do it with that bass line again. In fact, this time I'm going to do it where I put in the 6th, yeah. Changing now. Going up to the G. And if you think of even somebody like Fats Domino doing Blueberry Hill or something, he plays triplets. So in other words, for every quarter note, every crotchet, however you want think of those things, he's going to play 3 notes. He's going to go da da da. So 1, 2, 3, 4. A way of counting that is 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a. Now, if you're really clever, you can sound like Fats Domino doing his blues by doing this. Get it? Okay, so you can get a little bit stiff doing that, but you can just do it for a few bars, and you'll notice that occasionally I varied the left hand to make it a little bit more interesting. Now, you might think, well, that's okay, but I really want to play some blues solos. And again, one step at a time. A lot of jazz blues videos will say, oh, you need to learn this scale, and you're using this scale and that mode. That's all very good. And if you really, really want to learn your stuff, you need to learn all your chords, all your scales, how they go together. But you can get a bit bogged down, and you don't want to have all these scales but not know how to use them. So when you're thinking about the blues, it's better maybe at the start to just use a few notes and think more like a blues singer would sing, you know, something, I'm here in my studio and I've got the blues. I'm just making that up, but just give you an idea. It's got to have that kind of sound to it. And when I sang that, I was only using a few notes. I remember going to see a jazz festival. I saw all these great jazz musicians, and then B.B. King, the great blues guitarist, came on, and he just strung his guitar on and played two notes. He went, that's what he did, and something inside me erupted. It was just, he seemed to say so much just with those two notes. So what we're going to do, we're going to start with those two notes. So that was, there's the root, C, and that was the sixth of the scale. So we got, right, forget about the other notes for now, just those two notes. And let's see if we can just start getting a little bit of a bluesy chant going, playing our left hand and those two notes, okay? So, now I changed the chord. I'm going to show you that in a few minutes, the change of chord. So that was making a melody. Even though the chords changed, these bluesy notes seem to work. So let's just add another note to that, vary it a little bit. So I'm going to add the fifth. So we've now got the fifth, the sixth, back to the roots, okay? So now, occasionally I'm going to put in that G as well. And let's see what we can do just with three notes, yeah? Okay, so I was just making that up. You can try it yourself. Again, I just kept it to playing those quarter notes in the left hand. And I was doing a little bit of syncopation in the right hand. And the left hand helps you keep it in place. Now, don't lose heart if you start playing the right hand and suddenly the left hand goes to pieces. You are trying to coordinate left and right, thinking about different notes, thinking about making up a melody and the time in between the two hands. The more you do it, the more you'll get used to it. Okay, take it a step further. And now, a famous blues note is what we call the flattened third. So if we've got the third note of the scale, we've got the E. This is what we're playing here, aren't we? But quite often a blues singer or a blues guitarist or a blues harmonica player, they'll kind of bend that note and they won't quite go to the E. They'll kind of just bend the note. Instead of going to a pure E, they'll go to that sound, yeah? So now let's see what we can do. Keep it simple. I'm going to do a few bars and I'm just going to do the C and the E flat. Then I might add the sixth or the fifth. And so we're actually playing with just 4 notes now. So let's see what we can do, yeah? I made a mistake. I played a D, didn't I? Let me just do it without anything but the E flat and the C to start. Yeah, so that's your next thing to practice, just using those 4 notes. Now, I rushed ahead a bit, didn't I? Because I put in a D. So there are some passing notes which, if we treat those as your anchor notes, the notes that you really want to play, you might want to occasionally go and put the D in between, yeah? So if we do that, it might sound a little bit more like this. You can see just by doing those few things, you're starting to sound like you're playing the blues. Now, if we think about scales and we think about the notes that I used, and we start on the C, I use the C, D, E flat, G, A. Just those 5 notes. Some people might call that a pentatonic scale because there's only 5 notes. There's some notes missed out, yeah? And you could call it a blues scale if you want, because it's a... Now, for the purposes of this video, I'm not going to teach you the other blues scales. They can be for a more advanced video, but you've got plenty to go on with that. Now let's just go back to ways you can vary the chords. And we started off, we had 4 bars of C and 2 bars of F, 2 bars of C, 2 bars of G, 2 bars of C. Now, with slightly more advanced blues tunes, you can add another F. It's going to come on the 2nd bar, so to the F, and then 2 bars of C. Yeah. So we had 4 bars of C. Now all we're doing is to add a bit of variety, we're going to go to the F on the 2nd bar. Then when we've gone back to the C, we're going to go exactly how we did before, 2 bars and 2 bars of C. And then at the end, instead of having 2 bars on G, you can do, and then a bar on F, yeah? So you'd end up with something like this. So you see, we're starting to get a few variety. I did put in a few different notes. I think one of the things is I'm quite aware that if you play a G7 chord, that's the 5 chord, and you keep into the blues notes, sometime it can sound a bit harsh, and that's because you've got the B and a C at the same time. Now, that's why sometimes it's nice to just play around those notes, and so don't just because it clashes, but you use your ear as well as your knowledge of notes to find out what's tasteful, what works. And there are occasions when you can play a note that doesn't fit, because people get used to the sound of the blues scale. This is a very good lesson, that they're on a journey with you and they don't really notice that it's clashing against the notes of the chord because they're in the flow of the melody. That sounds very complicated, but when you listen to music, just listen to that and you might think, oh yeah, actually that note that that singer's playing or that guitarist is playing isn't part of the chord, but it seems to be working. And if it just doesn't work, don't do it. Find another way of doing it. So I hope that's helped you.